The canvas flap of the freight wagon snapped open, letting in a howl of wind and a spray of icy snow. Annabelle Wade did not hesitate. She used the last of her strength to push herself over the tailgate, ignoring the splintered wood that tore at her hands. She landed hard. The impact stole the air from her lungs, driving her deep into a drift of fresh powder. For a second, there was only silence, a terrifying, muffled white. The wagon wheels rumbled away into the darkness, growing fainter. They had not seen, they had not stopped. She was still wearing the dress. The silk and lace, meant for a drawing room in Denver, was now soaked, ripped, and freezing stiff against her skin. It felt like armor made of ice. Her veil was long gone, torn away hours ago when she had fought him. The bruises on her jaw and ribs throbbed with a cold, deep ache. She pushed herself to her feet, sinking to her knees in the snow. The wind was a physical thing, a giant hand shoving her backward. It was the middle of the night, in the high country of Colorado, and a storm was moving in. She did not know which way the wagon had been going, only that it was taking her further away from the man she had fled. In the pocket of the ruined bridal gown, her fingers found the cold steel of the pistol. It was heavy, loaded, a small comfort. She started to walk, pushing through the drifts, aiming for a dark line of pine trees she could barely see against the graying sky. She had to get off the road. They would be looking for her. Her husband, the word was ash in her mouth, would not let his property escape. She had been running for 2 days. The escape from the ranch house, the barn, the screaming, the terror of that wedding night. It all blurred into a single, agonizing pulse of fear. She had hidden in the wagon hours ago, burrowing under tarps, praying. Now, she was free of the wagon, but she was trapped by the wilderness. A sound cut through the wind. Horses, shouts. Annabelle plunged into the trees, falling, scrambling back up. The branches whipped her face, catching the delicate lace of her sleeves and tearing it away. "Over here! I see tracks!" The voice was coarse, angry. She ran, fueled by a terror that burned hotter than the cold. She slid down a sharp embankment, tumbling into a gulch where the snow was waist-deep. She lay still, panting, her breath pluming in the air. 2 men on horseback appeared on the ridge above her. Their lanterns cut yellow beams through the falling snow. "Where did the little bird go?" one of them called, laughing. "She cannot have gone far," the other replied. "Mr. Kearns wants her back. He does not care in how many pieces." Annabelle pressed her face into the snow, muffling her own sobs. She waited. She waited until the cold seeped into her bones, until her shivering became uncontrollable. The men cursed, their voices fading as they followed the false trail of the road. She waited another hour, or maybe it was only 10 minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Finally, she moved. Every muscle screamed. She climbed out of the gulch, her hands raw, her feet numb inside the ruined satin slippers. She was somewhere near Silverton. She thought she had seen the signs, but Silverton was a town, and this was nothing. This was ridges and pines and a wind that wanted to scour her from the earth. She walked until she could not feel her legs, until the terror was replaced by a dull, hollow cold. The world tilted. The snow rose up to meet her. Reed Carver pulled the collar of his sheepskin coat tighter. The wind on this ridge always had teeth. His horse, a sturdy buckskin, shifted beneath him, blowing hard. Behind him, strapped to the saddle, was the carcass of a decent-sized buck. It was enough meat to last him, provided the snows came as hard as they threatened. He kept his hat pulled low, shielding his face from the wind, though the wind was the least of his concerns. The thick, ragged scarf around his neck covered the rest. He preferred to ride at night, especially when returning from a hunt. Fewer questions, fewer stares. The buckskin shied suddenly, snorting and backing up a step. "Easy, boy," Reed muttered, his voice rough. He scanned the trail. At first, he thought it was just another drift, a trick of the falling snow. But it was the wrong color. A patch of dirty white, almost gray, curled near the base of a frozen pine. He squinted. It was not a deer. It was not a coyote. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, moving with a quiet, practiced economy. He approached the bundle, his gut tight. Trouble always came when a man least expected it. It was a woman. She was half buried, her hair frozen to the ground, her face blue-white. She was wearing what looked like a fine dress, or what was left of it. It was madness. He nudged her shoulder with the toe of his boot. "Ma'am." No response. He cursed, low and soft. He looked back toward the pass. It would be closed by morning. If he left her, she would be dead in an hour. If he took her, she was trouble. He hated trouble. He knelt, his bad knee cracking in the cold. He could see the dark bruising on her cheek, the cut on her lip. Someone had been rough with her. He put his gloved fingers to her neck. The pulse was there, a frantic, shallow beat, like a trapped bird's wing. With a groan of reluctance, he slid his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing. He lifted her, the frozen silk of her dress crackling like paper. He draped her over the front of his saddle, mounted behind her, and urged the buckskin toward the faint glow of his cabin, hidden 2 miles deeper in the canyon. He lived alone. He had lived alone for 5 years, ever since the fire. The fire had taken his brother, his livelihood, and the left side of his face. It had left him with his cabin, a deep mistrust of all breathing creatures, and a single, cold purpose: vengeance. The man who set that fire, the man Reed had once trusted like family, was still out there, getting rich on the ashes of Reed's life. Reed nursed that hatred. He sharpened it daily like his knives. It was all he had. This woman was an intrusion on that fragile, bitter peace. He got her inside, kicking the door shut against the rising storm. The single room of his cabin was warm. A low fire burned in the stone hearth. He laid her on the floor, on the bearskin rug, not wanting to put her wet, frozen body on his cot. She looked half dead. Her dress was a mess of ice, mud, and frozen blood. He worked efficiently, his focus narrow. He built up the fire. He put a kettle of water on to boil, then ladled some broth from a pot into a tin mug. He looked at her. He had to get her out of those clothes. He hesitated, his right hand, the scarred one, curling into a fist at his side. He never showed that hand if he could help it. He unwrapped the scarf from his face, revealing the tight, pulled skin that ran from his jaw to his temple. The firelight was not kind to it. He touched the shoulder of her dress. The fabric was frozen solid. He could not unlace it. He could not pull it off without breaking her skin. He went to his trunk, pulled out a long, flannel nightshirt, and tossed it onto the rug beside her. He took his sharpest hunting knife from its sheath. She stirred as he knelt. Her eyes flew open. They were blue, wide, and utterly wild with terror. Annabelle woke to warmth, and then to fear. The last thing she remembered was the snow. Now, there was a ceiling of rough-hewn logs and the smell of wood smoke, and a man. He was a silhouette against the fire, large and dark. Then he turned, and the light caught his face. She screamed. It was a choked, dry sound. The left side of his face was a ruin of puckered flesh, pulling his eye and mouth into a permanent, unsettling grimace. He was holding a knife. She scrambled backward, crab-walking until her back hit the wall. Her pistol. Where was her pistol? "Stay away from me," she whispered, her voice cracking. Reed stopped. He held the knife up, handle first, then tossed it onto the blankets near her. "Your dress. It is frozen. You will lose the skin if you keep it on." She stared at the knife, then at him. He was not moving closer. "Where am I?" "My cabin." He backed away, putting the width of the room between them. He gestured to the mug of broth near the fire. "Drink that. Get those clothes off. Put that shirt on." He turned his back to her, a deliberate, clear gesture of privacy. Annabelle watched his back, her heart hammering. He was big, but he limped slightly. He stood by the fire, poking it, his shoulders tense. He was not attacking. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the knife. She looked down. The bridal gown was ruined, a symbol of her shame. She started to cut, sawing at the thick, frozen laces up her back, wincing as the cold fabric pulled at her skin. It took her long, agonizing minutes. The dress fell away in icy pieces, leaving her in her thin, torn chemise. She was shaking violently now, from cold and fear. She grabbed the flannel nightshirt. It was huge, thick, and smelled of soap and wood smoke. She pulled it over her head, the soft wool a sudden, shocking comfort. She crawled toward the fire, grabbing the tin mug. The broth was hot, salty. It burned a path down to her empty stomach. "Who are you?" she asked the man's back. "Reed Carver." He did not turn. "What do you want?" "For you to not die on my floor." He glanced over his shoulder. "I brought you in from the storm. You were near frozen." She looked for her pistol. He must have taken it. She was defenseless. "I have no money," she said, the words tumbling out. "I have nothing. Please, just let me stay until the storm passes. I will not be any trouble." "You are already trouble," he said, still not looking at her. "But you are right about the storm." He moved to the small, square window. The glass was thick with frost. Outside, the wind howled, a high, thin scream. The snow was no longer falling. It was moving sideways, a solid white wall. "The pass is closed," he said, his voice flat. "It will be for a week, maybe more. We are stuck." Annabelle felt a new kind of dread settle over her. Trapped, again. But this time, with a scarred stranger in a cabin miles from anywhere. "You can have the cot," he said, gesturing to the narrow bed in the corner. "I will take the chair." She did not move. He sighed, a rough sound of impatience. "I am not him, girl." "Him? Whoever did that to your face?" He finally turned, and she saw him fully in the firelight. He was not an old man, perhaps 30, but his eyes were ancient. "I am not going to touch you. You are safe from that, at least now. Get some sleep. The cold takes its toll." He sat in the heavy wooden chair by the fire, picked up a piece of leather and a tool, and began to work, ignoring her completely. Annabelle slowly, painfully, moved to the cot. It was rough, but the blankets were thick. She lay down, still wearing his nightshirt, curling into a tight ball. She watched him. He worked on the leather, his movements precise. He favored his left hand. His right, she saw, was gloved, even indoors. She was exhausted, but sleep would not come. She was trapped in a tiny room with a man who looked like a monster, while other monsters hunted her in the snow. That night, the nightmares came for her. She was back in the carriage, her father's cold hand on hers. "You will save this family, Annabelle. You will do your duty." Then the wedding, the smell of whiskey and cigars, Mason Kearns. His face flushed, his eyes too bright. He was nearly twice her age, a wealthy man with a reputation for cruelty. Her family had sold her to him to cover their debts. Then the wedding night, his hand, not gentle, on her dress. Her refusal, the sound of his open palm hitting her cheek, the darkness of the barn he locked her in, the promise of what he would do when he returned in the morning. She cried out, a thin, strangled sound in the darkness of the cabin. Across the room, Reed Carver's eyes snapped open. He sat in the chair. The fire burned down to glowing embers. He could hear her tossing, whimpering. He heard her whisper, "No, please, do not." His jaw clenched. He gripped the arms of the chair, his knuckles white. He knew those sounds. He knew the shape of that fear. He had made similar sounds himself, long ago, when the barn roof caved in and the smell of his own burning flesh filled his lungs. The woman cried out again, a sharp gasp. He did not move. He did not go to her. He did not offer comfort. Comfort was a lie, a weakness he could not afford, and she would likely not believe it anyway. He just sat, listening, a silent witness in the dark as the storm raged outside, sealing them in. The morning brought a dead, heavy silence. The wind had stopped. Annabelle woke slowly. Her body ached, a deep, comprehensive pain. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then she saw the scarred man, asleep in the chair, his head slumped to his chest. She slid off the cot. The floor was freezing. She moved to the window and rubbed a small circle in the frost. What she saw stole her breath. The world was gone. Everything was white. The snow was drifted up past the windowsill, halfway up the door. The trees were heavy, coated in thick, pristine ice. The mountains around them were blindingly white against a pale blue sky. It was beautiful. A clean, new world. And it was a prison. There was no escape. She looked at the sleeping man, his scarred face relaxed in sleep, looking almost peaceful. Then she looked at her own hands, bruised and cut. The wilderness was pure, but they were not. They were two broken, damaged things, hidden inside it. The howling ghosts of the storm had passed, but the ghosts inside the cabin were just waking up. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to a pile of gray ash and a few stubborn embers. Reed Carver was already awake, standing by the door, pushing against it with his good shoulder. The snow had piled high, sealing them in. Annabelle sat up on the cot, pulling the thick wool blankets around her. The flannel nightshirt was warm, but the air bit at her face. "It is no use," he said, his voice a low gravel. "We are buried. I will have to use the window." She watched him. He moved with a stiff grace, his limp more pronounced in the morning cold. He retrieved his heavy coat and hat, pulled on his boots, and unlatched the wooden shutter of the small window. He hoisted himself up and disappeared through the opening, his legs kicking for a moment before he vanished into the white. She was alone. Her first instinct was to search, for her pistol, for any weapon. She moved quickly, her bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. She looked under his cot, in the small crate that served as a table. Near the hearth. Nothing. He had hidden it. She found her dress. He had piled the frozen, cut pieces near the door, perhaps to be thrown out. The sight of it made her stomach clench. She turned away just as his face appeared at the window. "Hand me the shovel," he called. She saw it leaning by the door. She picked it up and passed it to him. Handle first. For the next hour, there was only the sound of scraping and an occasional muffled curse from outside. A sliver of gray light eventually appeared at the top of the door, then a wider crack. Finally, the door swung open with a groan, revealing a wall of snow higher than a man's head. Reed stood in the trench he had dug, breathing hard, his scarred face flushed from the effort. He stepped inside, kicking snow from his boots. He did not look at her. He went to the hearth, skillfully arranging kindling with his left hand, his gloved right hand resting unnaturally at his side. "There is coffee," he said, nodding to a sack on a high shelf. "And a grinder. Make yourself useful." The silence stretched. She had to say something. She had to be someone. Annabelle Wade was a runaway bride, hunted. That woman could not stay here. "My name," she said, her voice small. "It is Clara. Clara Hill." He paused, his back to her. He fed a larger piece of wood into the new flames. "I did not ask." "I know, but I am grateful for bringing me in. Gratitude is a poor currency up here. Miss Hill." He stood and faced her, his expression unreadable in the growing light. "I do not care who you are or what you are running from. I live quiet. You bring trouble here. I will put you back out in the snow myself. Understand?" His eyes, That was the part that did not fit. His words were hard, a clear warning, but his eyes were not cold. They were watchful, deep-set, and held a banked fire that looked less like malice and more like an old, familiar pain. "I understand," she whispered. "I will not bring trouble." He grunted, a sound of disbelief, and turned back to the fire. The day settled into a strange, suspended rhythm. The snow did not stop, but it lessened, falling in a steady, silent curtain that erased the world. Their prison was quiet, muffled. Annabelle, calling herself Clara, learned the shape of his life. He was a man of harsh routines. He rose before the light, tended the fire, and then would spend an hour at his small table. He would pull out a whetstone and sharpen his knives. He had many: a large skinning knife, a smaller gutting knife, and a long, wicked-looking blade she thought was for fighting. The sound of the steel whispering on the stone was the only sound in the cabin for that hour. He would clean his rifle, meticulously, and she saw him check a second pistol, a Colt Dragoon, which he kept tucked in a holster nailed to the inside of his bed frame, hidden from view. He had taken her pistol, she realized, not to disarm her completely, but to control the weapons. In the afternoon, he would go out. She watched through the window as he chopped firewood. He used a heavy axe, swinging it powerfully with his left arm, his body twisting to compensate. He never used his right hand for heavy work. He kept it gloved, always. She saw him once, inside, when he thought she was asleep. Take the glove off to rub the bare, twisted flesh. It was not just scarred, it was drawn tight, the fingers curled inward like a claw. He rarely spoke. He did not ask her about her past, her family, or how she came to be in a wedding dress in the middle of a blizzard. He seemed determined to ignore her, but she would feel his eyes on her. She would look up from washing their tin plates, and he would be watching her, his gaze intense, before he looked away. The tension in the cabin was thick. It was the tension of two animals forced into the same burrow, wary, waiting for the other to show its teeth. On the fourth morning, the dream came for her. She was in the barn, the smell of hay and manure, the scratch of the rope against her wrists. Mason Kearns was standing over her, his face dark with rage, his fine suit coat thrown aside. "You are my wife," he hissed, his hand grabbing her hair. "You will learn what that means." He unbuckled his belt. Annabelle woke up screaming. The sound tore through the quiet cabin. She was thrashing, tangled in the blankets, her eyes wide and blind with terror. Reed was across the room in 2 strides. He had been asleep in his chair, and his reaction was pure instinct. He saw the threat, the panic. He grabbed her wrists, pinning her to the cot. "Stop!" he yelled. "Stop fighting!" His grip was iron. His scarred face, inches from hers, was harsh in the moonlight. To Annabelle, it was the same moment, a man holding her down, a man's face twisted in the dark. She screamed again, a raw, terrified sound, and bucked against his hold, trying to twist free. "No, please, Mason, do not, please!" The name hit Reed like a bucket of ice water. Mason. He froze. His grip did not lessen, but the anger in his face vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocked clarity. He was not seeing a threat. He was seeing her. He was seeing the raw panic in her eyes. "Clara," he said, his voice rough but lower. "It is Reed. You are in the cabin. You are safe." His words did not penetrate her fear. She was still fighting him, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in sobs. "Look at me," he commanded. He gave her a small, sharp shake. "Look at me. I am not him." Her eyes finally focused. She saw the deep-set, haunted eyes, the ruined side of his face. She saw the man who had pulled her from the snow, not the man who had put her in the barn. The fight drained out of her in an instant. Her body went limp, and a dry, racking sob tore from her chest. Reed let go of her wrists as if they had burned him. He scrambled backward, standing up, putting distance between them. He ran his good hand through his hair, his breath unsteady. "You were dreaming," he said, stating the obvious. He sounded shaken. She curled into a ball on the cot, pulling her knees to her chest, hiding her face. She was trembling so violently she thought her bones might break. He had not hurt her. He had been trying to help. He had been protecting her, even from herself, and she had called him by that man's name. He stood by the hearth for a long time, his back to her. He stoked the fire, adding logs with more force than necessary. The cabin was filled with the sound of her quiet, broken weeping. He did not go back to his chair. He did not speak again. He just stood, a dark sentinel by the flames, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the frosted window. That evening, the air was still thick with the aftermath. Annabelle had not spoken all day. She had moved like a ghost, fetching water, stirring the pot of stew he had prepared. Reed, too, was silent, his movements curt. The nightmare had broken something. The fragile peace of strangers was gone. She was sitting on the floor by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames. She could not bear the silence, but she did not know what to say. "He was my husband," she said, the words so quiet they were almost lost to the crackle of the fire. Reed stopped his work, the piece of leather in his hand forgotten. He did not turn. "I was married for one day," she continued, her voice gaining a thin, brittle strength. "My family, they have land, but no money, debts. They made a bargain. Me, for my father's reputation." She stared at the fire, seeing the barn, seeing Mason's face. "His name is Mason Kearns. He is nearly twice my age. A rich man, a man who buys what he wants. He bought me." She took a shaky breath. "On our wedding night, I told him I could not. I asked him for time. He laughed. He said he had paid for a wife, and he would have one. When I fought him, he hit me. He dragged me to the barn and locked me in. He said he would be back in the morning to break me." She was crying now, silent tears tracking through the soot on her cheek. "I found a loose board. I just ran. I found his man's pistol in the stable. I ran until I found that wagon." The cabin was deathly still. Reed slowly turned and looked at her. He saw the bruises on her face, fresh and dark. He saw the terror that still clung to her. He saw the truth. He sat down on the floor, not in his chair, but on the other side of the hearth. He kept his distance, but he was no longer looming over her. He was on her level. He said nothing for a long time. He just watched the fire. "Vengeance," he finally said, his voice quiet. "It is a cold thing to live on." She looked at him, confused. "What?" "The man you are running from, Kearns. You want him dead." I just want to be free." "It is the same thing, sometimes." Reed picked up a stick and pushed an ember back into the fire. His gloved right hand rested on his knee. "How do you—" she started, but trailed off. He looked at his gloved hand. "You get scars different ways, some from fire, some from men who are supposed to be your brothers." She waited. "I had a horse ranch," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Me and my brother, we had a partner, a man we trusted with everything. He wanted it all for himself. He saw a way to get it. He set a fire, a big one, timed it with a spring storm, so the smoke would be low." He touched the scarred side of his face. "My brother, he did not make it out of the house. Our partner, he shot me, left me for dead in the tack room. But the fire did not finish the job." He looked back at the flames, and Annabelle saw the hatred in his eyes. Cold and pure. "He got the ranch, the insurance money, everything. He thinks I am dead. He thinks he won." He clenched his good fist. "I am still here, and I am waiting. I live for the day I find him. I will have my revenge." He had given her his story for hers, a piece of his darkness to balance her own. It was not comfort. It was a kind of recognition. They were not just two people trapped by the snow. They were two people trapped by the past. The confession broke the tension. The following days were different. The silence was no longer hostile. It was shared. They worked. The cabin was small, and survival was a constant, demanding task. He taught her how to grind the coffee beans, a chore that took time and strength. She took it over, the rhythmic grinding a comfort. He climbed onto the roof to patch a leak, and she stood below in the snow, handing him the tools he needed, her hands numb, but her mind clear. They shoveled the path to the woodpile together. They cooked together, moving around each other in the small space with a new, careful awareness. She mended his coat while he cleaned his rifle. They were a strange, broken pair, but they were working. One night, the storm had quieted, and the moon was bright, casting a blue light over the snow. Reed came back inside from checking his snares, empty-handed. He was stamping the snow from his boots when he stopped. Annabelle was by the fire. She thought he was still outside. She had pushed the flannel nightshirt up, her back to the room, examining the dark, ugly bruise high on her hip, where Mason had kicked her when she fell. She touched it, her fingers tracing the outline, and her shoulders began to shake. A single, quiet sob escaped her. Reed stood in the shadows by the door, unmoving. He watched her. He saw the mark, dark against her pale skin. He saw her pain. Not the performance of the nightmare, but the quiet, private grief. He moved, his boots scraping the floor. She gasped, startled, and pulled the shirt down, wiping her eyes. I did not hear you." He walked slowly toward the fire. He did not look at the spot she had been touching. He looked at her face. He knelt, his bad knee cracking. So he was level with her. The firelight played over his scars, making them seem deeper, harsher, but his eyes were not. "Do you want me to leave the room?" he asked, his voice low. The question stunned her. It was a courtesy she had not been given in a very long time. It was a choice. He was not demanding, or pitying, or ignoring. He was asking. She looked at him, at this man who lived for revenge, who was covered in scars, who had every reason to be a monster, and in that moment, she was not afraid of him. Her tears spilled over. "Do not go," she whispered, her voice thick. Just do not touch me yet." He nodded, a single, curt movement. He did not go back to his chair. He sat on the floor, on the other side of the hearth, same as before. He picked up his piece of leather and his tools and began to work. His head bent. He stayed. The fire glowed between them, a small, warm space in the vast, cold wilderness. And for the first time in a very long time, Annabelle did not feel entirely alone. The thaw came 9 days after Annabelle's arrival. It was not a true thaw, but a shifting in the air. The relentless snow stopped, and a weak, watery sun appeared, making the vast expanse of white almost blinding. The temperature rose just enough to create a treacherous crust on the drifts. With the break in the weather came a new, sharper anxiety. The pass might open, the world might return. Reed had spent the morning on the ridge, his rifle in hand, scanning the canyon below. He said he was checking snares, but Annabelle knew he was watching. When he returned, his scarred face was set in grim lines. He said nothing, but he spent an hour sharpening the long knife he kept by his cot. The fragile piece of their shared confessions had settled into a routine. She was Clara, and he was Reed, and they moved around each other in the small space, bound by the things they had not said. She had seen his scars. He had seen her nightmares. It was a strange, silent understanding. The knock came in the middle of the afternoon. It was sharp, confident. Reed was on his feet before the sound faded. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip, his eyes flashing to Annabelle. He put one finger to his lips. A silent, absolute command. He moved to the door, not in front of it, but to the side. his body pressed against the logs, his gun drawn. "Who is it?" he called, his voice a low growl. A friendly voice answered, too friendly. "Just a pair of traders. Friend. Ben Pike and his partner. We saw your smoke, hoping for a cup of hot coffee and maybe a trade, if you are willing. We got pelts." Reed looked at Annabelle. His eyes were cold. He motioned for her to move to the darkest corner of the cabin, behind his cot, and to stay down. She obeyed, her heart turning to ice. Reed holstered his pistol but did not unlatch the door. "Not trading. Pass is closed." "We know it," the man called, his cheerfulness sounding false. "Been stuck in a line camp 2 miles down. Just looking for a warm fire before we try our luck tomorrow. We will pay for the coffee. A silver dollar for 2 cups. A silver dollar for coffee. It was a lie. Reed slowly lifted the bar on the door. He opened it only a crack, bracing it with his boot, his body blocking the opening. Annabelle peered through a gap in the cot's frame. She could see 2 men, bundled in heavy buffalo coats. One was stocky, with a thick beard frosted with ice. The other was younger, thinner, with nervous eyes that darted everywhere. They carried rifles, but they also had packs that looked heavy with traps or furs. "I told you, I am not trading," Reed said. His voice was flat, dead. "Come on, friend," the bearded man said, smiling, but his eyes were not. "Just a little Christian charity. We heard there was trouble on this trail before the storm hit. We are just glad to see another soul." "What kind of trouble?" Reed asked. The thin one spoke, his voice reedy. "Looking for someone. They were pair of bounty men blew through Silverton, asking questions, set a rancher's wife up and ran off. A real shame, leaving a good husband like that." The bearded man, Ben, nudged his partner, silencing him. "He means nothing, just trail gossip. Now, about that coffee, we would be obliged." He tried to peer past Reed, into the cabin. "You all alone up here? Must get lonely." Reed's hand, his gloved right hand, rested on the door jamb. Annabelle watched as he slowly, deliberately, tapped his curled fingers against the wood. It was a small, unsettling movement. "I am," Reed said, "and I like it that way." "We heard," Ben said, his smile fading. "Heard a scarred man lived up here, kept to himself. That is fine by us, but we also heard—" "You heard what you heard." Reed cut him off. He pushed the door open another few inches, just enough for the men to see the heavy Colt pistol at his belt. "And now you have heard me. I am not buying, I am not selling, and I am not hosting. The trail is that way." The 2 men exchanged a look. The friendly act was gone. The bearded man's eyes narrowed. He looked at the cabin, at the single cot, and then at the boot prints in the snow near the woodpile, prints from Annabelle's smaller boots, which Reed had given her. "No offense meant," Ben said, raising his hand slightly. "Just being neighborly." "I do not need neighbors," Reed said. He stared at the man, his scarred face impassive, but his eyes were burning. "And I do not like men who lie about the price of coffee. Move on." The standoff lasted another second. The bearded man measured Reed, saw the absolute lack of fear, and made a decision. "Come on, Jeb," he said to his partner. "Man wants to be alone." They turned and trudged back down the trench Reed had dug, their shoulders hunched. Reed watched them until they were out of sight, past the line of pines. He did not close the door. He stood there, breathing in the cold air, his back rigid. When he finally turned and shut the door, barring it, his face was terrifying. It was not anger. It was a cold, settled certainty. "They were not fur traders," Annabelle whispered from the corner. "No," he said, not looking at her. He went to the window, peering out. "They were looking for me." "Yes." How did you know?" "A silver dollar for coffee," he said, his voice clipped. "And his eyes. He was looking for a woman's touch in here, a shawl, a bonnet, Something to prove you were here?" He turned to her, and the quiet that had grown between them was gone, replaced by the harsh reality she had brought to his door. "You told me your name was Clara Hill." He said it was not a question. She stood up, her legs trembling. I was afraid." "You were right to be." He crossed the room in 2 strides. His limp pronounced. He stood over her. "You lied. You brought 2 armed men to my door. The trouble I warned you about? It is here. It is sniffing at my door." "I did not know." "You knew you were running," he roared, his voice cracking with a sudden, violent anger. "You knew they were hunting you. You thought I was just some scarred fool you could hide behind." "No, I needed a place to hide," he finished. "And you picked my home. You put my life at risk, for your lies." He was furious, and she saw in that fury a mirror of the fear he lived with. She had breached his defenses. She had brought the outside world, the world that had burned him, right to his hearth. "Get your things," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "What?" "The dress, the boots, whatever is yours, get it. You are leaving." The words hit her harder than Mason's fist. "You cannot," she whispered. "The snow, they are out there. They will find me." "That is your concern, not mine." He grabbed the tattered remains of her wedding dress and threw them at her feet. "I took in a stranger. I did not take in a liar who is hunted by bounty men." The terror was so sharp, so absolute. She thought she would be sick. He was going to put her out. He was going to feed her to them. She backed away from him until she hit the cold log wall. He advanced, his face a mask of rage. He was going to throw her out, physically. "My name is Annabelle," she cried, the words tearing out of her. "Annabelle Wade." He stopped. "My husband is Mason Kearns," she sobbed. "I told you the truth about that. He is a rich man, a powerful man. He trades in debt. He bought me from my father. And when I ran, he sent those men, the men you saw on the trail that first night. These men, he will not stop until he has me back, because I am his property, because he cannot stand to lose." She was sliding down the wall, her legs giving out. "I lied about my name because I was afraid you would turn me in, that you would take his money. Everyone takes his money." He stood in the middle of the room, breathing hard, watching her. The anger was still there, but it was warring with something else. He was listening. "I did not come here to die," she whispered, looking up at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "But I will. I swear to you, I will. Because I would rather freeze to death on that mountain than let you, or them, or any man, drag me back to him." She met his gaze, her terror finally burning into a cold, hard ember of defiance. "I will not go back." He stared at her. The silence in the cabin was absolute, broken only by her ragged breathing and the pop of the fire. He saw the truth in her eyes. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a statement of fact. She would die first. He turned away from her, the violence draining out of his posture. He ran his good hand over his face, over the scars, a gesture she was beginning to recognize. He was tired. He walked to his cot, bent down, and reached under it. He pulled out a small, oilcloth bundle. He unwrapped it. It was her pistol, the one she had taken from the stable. He checked the load, his movements economical, precise. He did not look at her. He walked over and tossed it onto the blankets of her cot. "You will need it," he said, his voice rough. "You do not know how to shoot, I wager." She stared at the gun. My brother taught me a little." "A little is not enough," he said. He went back to the window, resuming his watch. They will be back, or others will come. The snow will not hold them forever. He had not forgiven her, but he had not thrown her out. He had given her a weapon. He had made her a partner in the danger, not just the cause of it. The next few days were taught with a new, shared reality. The men did not return, but their presence lingered. Reed became a restless shadow, cleaning his weapons, pacing the small cabin, or disappearing for hours to scout the ridges, returning with a grim face and a few snared rabbits. The bond between them deepened, forged not in comfort, but in shared risk. The small courtesies were replaced by a practical intimacy. When they passed in the narrow space between the table and the hearth, their arms brushed. It was no longer an accident. It was a connection. He would find her watching him, and instead of looking away, his gaze would hold hers, a silent acknowledgement. She saw the concern in his eyes when her nightmares returned, and he would simply build up the fire. The quiet crackle of the flames, a reassurance in the dark. One afternoon, the brief thaw had made the path to the creek treacherous. The snow was packed and slick. Annabelle was carrying 2 buckets of water, her mind on the men, on Mason, on the pistol now tucked under her thin mattress. Her foot slipped. She stumbled, trying to catch her balance on the ice-sheeted rocks. She fell hard, her leg twisting. She felt a sharp, searing pain just below her knee. She cried out, a sharp gasp. She looked down. One of the tin buckets was dented. The other had fallen onto a jagged shard of rock frozen in the creek bed. She had fallen against it. The blood was shockingly bright against the white snow. It pumped, dark and heavy, from a long, deep gash in her calf. "Reed!" He was there in seconds, running from the woodpile, axe in hand. He saw her, saw the blood, and dropped the axe. "Do not move," he commanded. He ripped the scarf from his own neck, the one that usually hid his scars, and knelt beside her. He packed it against the wound, pressing hard. She cried out again. "It is deep," he said, his voice tight. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, his good arm under her back, his gloved, scarred hand gripping her thighs, careful to avoid the wound. He carried her back to the cabin, kicking the door open. He laid her gently on his cot. Not hers. It was closer to the fire. "Keep pressing on it," he ordered. He moved with a frantic, controlled energy. He washed his hands in the basin, then pulled a small wooden box from his trunk. It contained a bottle of whiskey, clean rags, a needle, and some thick black thread. "This will hurt," he said, his voice strangely soft. He moved the blanket. He had to push the flannel nightshirt up past her knee, bearing her leg to the hip. Annabelle flushed, but her fear of the wound was greater than her modesty. He cleaned it with whiskey. She stifled a scream, her knuckles white as she gripped the blanket. The blood kept welling up. "I have to stitch it," he said. "Hold still." He threaded the needle. His hands, she saw, were shaking. The same hands that could skin a deer in the fading light, the same hands that held his knives with such deadly precision, were trembling as they touched her skin. He began to sew, his head bent low, his scarred face inches from her. His breath was warm. She could smell the faint, clean scent of the lye soap he used. She watched his face, not the wound. She saw the intense concentration, the pull of the skin around his eye, the way his jaw was clenched. He was all business, his touch impersonal, yet it was the most intimate touch she had ever known. He was mending her. When he finished, his entire body was tense. He gently tied off the thread and covered the wound with a clean rag. His fingers, rough and calloused, grazed the pale skin of her thigh. He flinched, pulling his hand back quickly, and covered her with a blanket. "You will stay in bed," he said, his voice hoarse. "For at least 2 days. Keep it clean." He stood and walked to the fire, turning his back to her. He braced his good arm against the stone chimney. His head bowed. He was breathing heavily. That night, the tension was a physical thing. The storm had returned, the wind howling around the eaves, rattling the window shutter. It was a wild, violent night, echoing the turmoil inside the cabin. Annabelle lay on the cot, her leg throbbing. Reed sat in his chair, sharpening a knife, The shing, shing, shing of the stone, a nervous, angry sound in the small room. He had not spoken a kind word since the accident. He had been curt, bringing her water and broth without meeting her eyes. She knew he was not angry at her. He was angry at the situation, at the intimacy, at the feeling that was vibrating between them. She felt it too. It was not just gratitude. It was a deep, aching pull toward the one person who had seen her at her worst and had not turned away. She could not bear the silence. "Read," she said. The sound of the stone stopped. He did not look up. "You were gentle," she said. "Thank you." "I am not a gentleman," he said, his voice rough. "You were," she insisted. She sat up, wincing as her leg protested. She pushed the blankets aside and swung her feet to the floor. "Get back in bed," he ordered, standing. "No." She stood up, leaning on the cot for support. She took one step, then another, until she was standing in the middle of the room, in the firelight. She was in his nightshirt. She was wounded, but she did not feel weak. I do not know what to do," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved me. You are protecting me. You stitched my leg. I have nothing to pay you with." "I do not want payment," he said, his voice tight. He would not look at her. "I know." She took another step, until she was standing directly in front of him. He was so tall. He smelled of pine and smoke. "But I am not that girl, the one in the barn. Not anymore. You did that." He finally looked at her. His eyes were dark, tormented. "Annabelle, go to bed." "I am so tired of being afraid," she whispered. She reached up, her hands shaking, and touched his face. She did not touch the good side. She laid her palm against the scarred, puckered flesh of his cheek. He did not pull away. He froze, his whole body rigid, his eyes closing as if in pain. She leaned in, rising on her toes, and kissed him. It was clumsy, hesitant, a press of her lips against his. A sound like a choked animal came from his throat. He did not kiss her back. She pulled away, ashamed, confused. "I am sorry, She was testing him. She was testing herself. She did not know what she wanted, only that the fear was being replaced by a different, sharper hunger, a need to be seen, to be touched, not in violence, but in this new, raw way. She reached for the hem of the flannel nightshirt. "I want—" "Stop!" His voice was a rasp. He grabbed her hands, his grip firm, stopping her. He looked down at her, his face a battle of desire and a deep, profound restraint. "Not like this." I do not understand." "Not like this," he repeated, his voice thick. "Not when you are afraid. Not when you think you owe me." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over. He thought she was paying a debt. He thought she was still the terrified victim. "I am not afraid," she whispered, the tears tracking down her face. "I do not want to be afraid anymore." His expression broke. The harshness dissolved, leaving only a raw, aching vulnerability. He saw her then. He saw the woman she was trying to be, not the girl who had been broken. He raised his good hand, his fingers trembling, and gently cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed away a tear. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a promise, a benediction. It was more tender than anything she had ever known. Then he let her go, stepping back as if she were the fire. The effort it cost him was visible. His whole body was trembling. "Get to bed, Annabelle," he said, his voice ragged. He grabbed his coat from the peg, unbarred the door, and stepped out into the raging storm, the wind and snow, visibility. He did not seem to feel it. He just stood there, his back to the light of the cabin, trembling with a restraint that was more powerful than any passion. He came back into the cabin an hour after he had stormed out. He was covered in fresh snow. his body rigid, not from the cold, but from the iron-willed restraint that had kept him standing in the storm. He did not look at her. He barred the door, kicked the snow from his boots, and added wood to the fire. Annabelle lay on the cot, her face turned to the wall. She was wrapped in the blanket, her leg throbbing, her heart aching with a complex mix of shame and a strange, unfamiliar warmth. He had kissed her forehead. He had treated her not as an object of desire, but as a person. And then he had fled. He did not sleep in his chair that night. He laid out his bedroll on the floor, near the hearth, as far from her cot as the small room would allow. They did not speak. The only sounds were the howling wind and the crackle of the fire. The storm broke before dawn. A false gray light filled the cabin, revealing a world encased in ice. Reed was up, pulling on his coat, his face grim. His movements were stiff. "Stay inside," he said, his voice a low command. "Keep the door barred. Do not open it for anyone." "Where are you going?" she asked, sitting up. "To see if they are still here." He picked up his rifle, checked the load. "They will have seen the smoke. They know I am here. They are just waiting to see if I am alone." "Reed, do not. It is too dangerous." "It is more dangerous to sit here and wait for them to come to us." He did not look at her. He seemed angry, but she realized it was not anger at her. It was anger at the world, at the men outside, at the intrusion. He left, and she barred the door behind him. She spent the morning pacing. Her leg was stiff, the stitches pulling, but she could not be still. She found her pistol, the one he had given her. She held it, the weight unfamiliar but reassuring. She was not the same woman who had fallen from the wagon. He was gone for 3 hours. When he returned, he was not the same man who had left. The restless energy was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly calm. He kicked the snow from his boots and barred the door. "They did not leave," he said. He unwrapped the scarf from his face. "Did you see them?" "I saw their camp." He walked to the hearth, his limp more pronounced. "They set up in a small ravine, downwind, about a mile from here. Smart. They were watching the cabin. One of them. One. The other one must have gone back to town for more men." Reed pulled his long skinning knife from its sheath. He pulled out his whetstone. The sound of steel on the stone filled the room. Shing! Shing! The one who stayed behind got careless. He left his horse tethered where the wind could get at it. Annabelle watched him. His eyes were flat, focused on the blade. "What did you do, Reed?" "A man on foot is slow in this snow," he said, his voice quiet. "A man on foot is a cold man, and a cold man makes mistakes." She understood. "You killed his horse." "I killed his horse. Shing, shing." "And I left him a message." "A message?" "I carved it into a pine tree, right above the carcass. Told him he and his friend Ben were not welcome. Told him the next time I saw them. I would not aim for the horse. He will find it, and he will know we are not just waiting to be taken." The cabin was silent save for the scraping of the stone. He was a hard man. A man who had lived by his own rules for so long that civilization was just a memory. She found she was not afraid of this part of him. She was, in a strange way, grateful for it. "We cannot stay," he said, testing the edge of the blade with his thumb. "He will go to his partner. They will come back, and they will not knock." He put the knife away and began to move. He pulled 2 worn saddlebags from his trunk and threw one to her. "Put food in there, jerky, coffee, hardtack, whatever will keep. We ride before dawn tomorrow." "We?" she asked, her heart leaping. "I cannot send you out alone. You would not last a day, and I cannot stay here. They know my face." He looked at her, his gaze sharp. "This is your trouble, Annabelle, but you brought it to my door. So now it is our trouble." She did not argue. She did not falter. She nodded. "I can help." For the rest of the day, they prepared. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the memory of the night before, but the tasks were real, grounding them. Annabelle's hands were shaking as she sewed dried meat into a canvas pouch. Her stitches were clumsy, but she did not stop. He watched her. He saw her bite her lip in concentration, her brow furrowed. She was not weeping. She was not shrinking. She was working. She moved to the table where he was loading ammunition. She picked up his rifle, the one he had left. "I need to load this," she said. He paused, then pushed a small box of cartridges toward her. "You know how?" "Show me." He did. His large, calloused hands, one perfect, one scarred, moved with precision. He showed her how to feed the cartridges into the side gate of the heavy rifle, how to work the lever, how to set the hammer. She mimicked his actions, her hands learning the cold, oily weight of the metal. The tension in the cabin grew with every passing hour. It was the tension of a spring wound too tight, the proximity, the shared danger, the unspoken desire, it all pressed down on them. Annabelle watched him as he moved, seeing the coiled rage just beneath his quiet demeanor. He was packing his knives, wrapping them in oilcloth. "You want to kill them, do you not?" she asked, her voice low. "Them and him, the man who burned you." He stopped, his back to her. He did not turn. "Yes," the word was flat, absolute. "Is that what keeps you breathing?" she whispered, remembering his confession. He was still for a long moment. He finally turned, his scarred face illuminated by the low fire. His eyes were ancient, filled with a pain so deep it looked like bedrock. "Revenge keeps you breathing," he said, his voice rough. "It gives you a reason to get up when the cold seeps into your bones. It is a fire. It keeps you from freezing, but it don't keep you warm." The admission hung in the air between them, a fragile, terrible truth. He saw this revenge as his only purpose, a cold duty. He looked at her face, her eyes wide with a strange, aching understanding. And he saw something that frightened him more than any bounty man. He saw a different kind of fire. That night, their last night, the air was sharp and clear. The storm was gone. A bright, merciless moon lit the snow-covered world, turning it to silver and black. They had finished packing. The saddlebags were lined up by the door. They ate their last meal in the cabin, a thick stew of rabbit and dried beans, in silence. Reed sat in his chair, cleaning his pistol. Annabelle stood by the fire, her body aching, her leg a dull throb, her mind electric. She knew what was coming. Tomorrow, they would ride into a world that wanted her captured and him dead. This night, this cabin, was the only sanctuary they had, and it was ending. "I am still afraid," she said, her voice catching. He looked up, his hands still of them. "No." She turned to face him. "I think I am afraid of this, of feeling anything. I was numb for so long, and now—" He stood up. He did not move toward her. He just stood, a large, dark silhouette against the moonlight from the window. "Annabelle?" It was a warning. "Last night, you stopped me," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You thought I was paying a debt. You thought I was afraid." "You were—" "I was," she agreed. "But not of you. I was afraid of this, of being alive. I am not afraid of that anymore. I am not that girl in the barn. I am not his property." She made the choice. It was not a test this time. It was a claiming. She reached for the top button of the flannel nightshirt he had given her. "Annabelle, do not," he said, his voice a low rasp. "It is not for payment," she whispered, her fingers fumbling with the button. "It is not for fear. It is for me. I need to know that I am still here, that he did not break me." She undid the second button, and the third. She pushed the heavy flannel off her shoulders. It sloughed to the floor, pooling at her feet, leaving her standing in her thin, mended chemise. The firelight kissed her skin, illuminating the pale skin, the faint, yellowing bruise on her jaw, and the dark, ugly mark on her hip. He did not move. He was trembling. His breath hitched. She saw the battle in his eyes. She saw the hunger, and she saw the honor, and she saw the deep, lonely ache that matched her own. She took his right hand, the gloved, scarred one, the one he hid. She lifted it, his fingers curled and stiff, and she pressed his palm to her body, placing it directly over the dark mark on her hip. "He did this," she whispered, her voice fierce. "It is a part of me, but it is not all of me." His scarred fingers uncurled, flattening against her skin, the heat of his touch searing her. A sound broke from his throat, a deep, wounded groan. She leaned in. She did not kiss his lips. She rose on her toes, reached for him, and pressed her mouth to the ruined flesh of his shoulder, where the scar twisted up toward his neck. She kissed the mark of his pain. That broke him. His good arm snaked around her waist, pulling her against him with a force that stole her breath. His scarred hand moved from her hip to her face, cupping her jaw. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not hesitant. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation. It was the collision of two souls who had been living on scraps for too long. His mouth was hard, demanding, and she met him with a matching hunger, her hands gripping his shirt. He lifted her, his limp forgotten, his body fueled by a need that was older than his vengeance. He carried her to his cot and laid her down on the furs. The firelight danced over them. He pulled back, his eyes dark, searching hers. He was giving her one last chance to run. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his scar. "Do not," she whispered. "Be gentle." He was not, but he was not cruel. His hands on her body were not the hands of Mason Kearns, taking what he had bought. They were the hands of Reed Carver, a man discovering something he thought was dead. His touch was rough, calloused, and yet it was worship. Their first time was not an act of love. It was an act of recognition. It was slow, aching, and intense. It was the recognition of pain, the mapped landscape of scars, seen and unseen. It was survival. It was a hunger for tenderness that had become so sharp it felt like violence. She cried out, not in pain, but in release, in the terrifying, powerful feeling of being whole. He held her, his body shuddering, and buried his face in her hair, finding an anchor in the storm. After they lay tangled in the blankets, the fire had burned down to embers. The cabin was quiet. He held her tight, his arm heavy across her waist, possessive. He did not let go. She could feel the unsteady beat of his heart against her back. He was quiet for so long. She thought he had fallen asleep. Then he murmured, his voice thick, his lips against her hair. "If this is wrong, I do not care." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had fled her father's house, she slept without nightmares. When Annabelle woke, the light in the cabin was gray and cold. She was alone in the cot. She sat up, pulling the fur blanket around her. The cabin was empty. The fire was almost dead. Just a few red embers in a bed of gray ash. Reed? A hollow silence answered her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She threw off the blanket. His nightshirt was on the floor where she had dropped it. She pulled it on. His coat was gone. His rifle was gone. His saddlebags were gone. His horse, the buckskin, was gone from the lean-to. He had left her. The despair was so sudden, so total, it buckled her knees. After last night, after everything, he had left her. Then she saw it. Her saddlebag, the one she had packed, was still by the door. Her pistol was on the table, and outside, she could hear the shuffling sound of his spare horse, the pack mule, still tied in the lean-to. He had not abandoned her. He had provisioned her. She found the note on the table. It was not a note. It was 3 words, scratched onto a piece of worn leather with the tip of his knife. "Silverton, train east. Stay safe." The panic turned to a cold, rising fury. He had ridden into town. He had ridden in to face those men, Ben and Jeb and whoever else was with them. He was going to buy her a train ticket, to draw them to him, to give her a chance to escape while he, died? He had made a decision for her. He had looked at her, at the woman who had shared his bed, and he had seen baggage to be protected, a problem to be solved. He had left her behind. "You bastard," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You do not get to decide." She did not hesitate. She pulled on the spare trousers he had left, cinching them with a piece of rope. She pulled on his spare shirt, her boots. Her leg ached, but she ignored it. She grabbed her pistol, stuffed it in her belt. She grabbed the saddlebag and ran to the lean-to. The mule was slow. The ride to Silverton was agonizing. A desperate, stumbling race through deep snow and icy creek beds. It took her hours. Every minute a torment. Imagining him cornered, imagining him dead. She reached the town as the sun was high, a weak winter eye. Silverton was a rough, snowbound collection of false-fronted buildings, the main street a river of mud and ice. She saw his buckskin tied outside the telegraph office, next to the Golden Nugget Saloon. She dismounted, her hands numb, her heart hammering. She saw him. He was walking out of the office, a small slip of paper in his gloved hand. The ticket. "Read!" He froze. He turned, and she had never seen such a look of pure shock and anger on a man's face. He looked guilty. "Annabelle," he growled, crossing the street toward her, his limp heavy. "What in God's name are you doing? I told you." "You told me nothing," she snapped, meeting him in the middle of the street. The few miners and townsfolk stopped to watch. "You wrote 3 words on a piece of leather. You left me." "I was protecting you." His voice was low, furious. "The train leaves in an hour. You have to be on it." "You do not get to decide for me," she cried, her voice rising. "You do not ride in here to get yourself killed and leave me to run. I am not your burden to unload." "It is not my mess. Annabelle, it is yours," he shot back, his scarred face tight with rage. "Those men are hunting you. I was giving you a way out, a way to be free." "This is not freedom. This is you dying for what? For me? I will not have it. I will not run while you—" Well, look what we got here, Ben." The voice cut through their argument, cold and familiar. They both turned. On the boardwalk in front of the saloon stood the 2 fur traders, Ben, the bearded one, and Jeb, the thin one. They were not alone. 2 other men, hard-faced and wearing dusters despite the cold, stood with them. All 4 had their hands near their guns. Ben smiled, a wide, ugly expression. "That is her, all right. Mrs. Kearns. Your husband is very eager to see you. Ma'am, he has offered a $500 bonus for your safe return." Reed moved so fast he was a blur. He grabbed Annabelle, shoving her behind him, his hand already on the butt of his pistol. "She is not going anywhere with you," Reed said, his voice flat. "I do not think you have a say, scarred man," Ben said, his smile never wavering. "There are 4 of us, and one of you." "2, Annabelle said. She stepped out from behind Reed, her own pistol in her hand, her arm shaking, but her aim steady. Ben laughed. "The little bird has claws." It happened faster than breathing. Reed saw Jeb's eyes flicker to the side. A signal. He did not wait. He drew his pistol. The street erupted. Gunfire echoed off the false fronts, deafening. Reed shoved Annabelle toward the alley between the saloon and the telegraph office, firing twice at Ben. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Reed's heavy coat, ripping a burning line across his shoulder. He grunted, stumbling, but never took his eyes off the men. The thin man, Jeb, ignored Reed. He saw Annabelle. The real prize. He broke cover, running to the side, raising his rifle to get a clear shot at her. He leveled the barrel. Annabelle saw him. She saw the black hole of the muzzle. She saw Reed bleeding, trying to turn. She did not think, she did not feel fear. She felt only a cold, clear certainty. She raised her pistol with both hands, just as her brother had taught her all those years ago. She aimed for the center of his chest. She fired. The recoil punched her arm back. The sound was deafening. Jeb stopped. He looked down at his chest, at the dark, spreading flour on his thin shirt. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. He coughed, a spray of red mist, and fell face first into the muddy, frozen snow. A sudden, terrible silence fell on the street. Ben, the leader, stared at his dead partner, his face a mask of shock. The other two men ducked back into the saloon. Reed grabbed her arm, his grip iron. Now! He fired twice more at the saloon's bat-wing doors, shattering the wood. He shoved her toward the horses. He is, Annabelle stammered, staring at the body in the snow. He is dead, Reed said, his voice rough. He threw her onto the mule, then vaulted onto his own buckskin, his rifle in his hand, his shoulder bleeding freely. Ride, hard! They did not stop riding for hours. Reed led them off the main trail, pushing the buckskin and the mule up a steep, pine-choked canyon, backtracking twice over frozen creek beds to hide their trail. The air was thin and bit at their lungs. Annabelle was numb. The image of Jeb falling, the spray of red against the white snow, played over and over in her mind. The sound of the shot, her shot, echoed in her ears. She had taken a life. The pistol was still in her hand, heavy, cold. Reed was a shadow ahead of her, slumped over the buckskin's neck. He held the rifle across his lap. He had not spoken since he yelled, "Ride!" He was bleeding. The left shoulder of his heavy coat was dark and saturated. He finally stopped when the moon was high and the canyon narrowed to a dead end, blocked by a sheer wall of rock. To one side, tucked against the cliff, was a ruin. It was a burned-out mining shack, the roof half caved in, the door long gone. "In here," he rasped. He slid from the saddle, his legs buckling. He caught himself against the horse, his breath hissing between his teeth. Annabelle fell from the mule, her legs weak. "Reed, you are hurt." "We are both hurt," he said. He pulled the horses into the relative cover of the shack's remaining wall. "Barricade the opening. Use that timber." He stumbled inside the structure and collapsed onto the dirt floor, his back against the one remaining wall. Annabelle's numbness shattered, replaced by a cold, sharp fear. She looked at the man on the ground, his face pale and slick with sweat in the moonlight. He had taken a bullet for her. She moved. She found the rotting timber he had pointed to and dragged it across the doorway, a flimsy barrier at best. She ran back to him. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just a graze," he muttered, his eyes closed. "But it burns like it burns." She saw the lie. His coat was soaked. She knelt beside him. "Let me see." "No." "Reed, I stitched my leg. You will let me see this." She did not wait for permission. Her hands were shaking, but she was gentle as she worked the heavy, blood-soaked coat off his shoulder. He groaned, a deep, animal sound. The shirt beneath was ruined. The bullet had torn a long, deep furrow across the muscle of his shoulder, missing the bone, but ripping the flesh open. It was bleeding sluggishly. It is not a graze. Reed, it is deep." She looked around the ruin. They had nothing. "The saddlebags," he whispered, gesturing to his horse. She ran, fumbling with the buckles, her fingers numb. She found his supplies, the oilcloth-wrapped knives, jerky, and a flask of whiskey. She brought them back. "This will hurt," she said, echoing his words from before. It already hurts. She ripped a long strip of cloth from her own chemise, her modesty a forgotten luxury. She uncorked the whiskey. Do not move. She poured the alcohol directly into the wound. Reed's body arched off the ground. He did not scream, but a low, choked sound was torn from his throat. His good hand gripped his knee, the knuckles white. She cleaned it as best she could in the freezing dark, her hands sticky with his blood. She packed the wound with the cleanest cloth she had and wrapped it tightly with another strip. I killed him, she whispered, her hands working, her gaze fixed on the bandage. That man, Jeb, I shot him. Reed's breathing was shallow. He opened his eyes, forcing himself to focus on her. He was going to kill you. You did what you had to. It was him, or it was us. You have done it before. Does it? It never gets easy, he said, his voice ragged. But you learn to live with it, or you die. There is nothing else. She finished the bandage. It was crude, but it was tight. She helped him shift, propping him against the saddlebag. She covered him with her own bedroll. You need to rest, she said. You need to watch, he countered. They will not be far behind. Ben got away. She sat near the dark opening, the rifle across her lap, and watched the moon track across the sky. She listened to the sound of Reed's breathing, shallow and pained, as the man who had saved her now depended on her to keep him alive. The wound festered. By the second day, she knew it was bad. The bullet had been dirty, the cloth had not been clean. He was burning with fever. He had not woken since the first night. He was trapped in a world of his own, tossing his head back and forth on the saddlebag, his breath coming in short, hot gasps. Annabelle was frantic. She melted snow in a tin cup, forcing lukewarm water between his cracked lips. He would swallow, sometimes, but mostly he just muttered, his voice thick and strange. The smoke, he whispered, his eyes squeezed shut. Elias, I smell smoke. Get the horses out. Get them out. He was not in the shack. He was in the fire. Annabelle bathed his face with snow, her own tears freezing on her cheeks. Reed, it is me. It is Annabelle. You are safe. There is no fire. Left me, he groaned, his body tensing. He tried to sit up, his eyes wild, but he was too weak. He left me. The door. He locked the door. Mason, you bastard. He was our partner, Elias. Annabelle froze, her hand halfway to his forehead. Mason. He could not have said that. It was a trick of the fever, a name she was thinking. Mason! Reed cried out again, a sound of such profound betrayal it broke her heart. Why? He was my brother. You left him to burn. You shot me and you left me. It was true. It was not a coincidence. It was not two separate tragedies. It was one man, one monster. Mason Kearns, her husband, the man who had bought her, the man who had beaten her. He was the partner who had betrayed Reed and his brother, the man who had set the fire, the man who had left Reed for dead. The world tilted. The man she had fled, the man she hated, was the same man Reed had lived 5 years to kill. All this time, they had been two halves of the same story, two victims of the same predator. I will kill him, Reed muttered, his voice dropping, his good hand clenching an imaginary knife. I will find him. I will. His voice trailed off into a pained sigh, and he sank back into the delirium. She watched him, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Mason Kearns, the land baron who trafficked in debt, who bought wives, who faked partnerships and took everything. It made a terrible, perfect sense. She spent the night keeping Reed alive, but her mind was clear. The fear was gone. The shock of killing Jeb was gone. There was only a cold, hard purpose. Reed had lived for revenge. Now, she understood why. The fever broke on the third morning. Reed woke slowly. His eyes were clear, The fire in them banked to a dull glow. He saw her, her face pale and smudged with soot, her eyes red-rimmed. "You are still here," he rasped. "I am still here." She held the tin cup to his lips. "Drink." He drank, long and deep. He looked at his shoulder, at the crude, stained bandage. He looked at the rifle, still resting near her. "How long?" "2 days," she said. "You had a fever." He pushed himself up, hissing as the wound pulled. "We have to move." "They are not coming," she said. "I have been watching. A storm front moved in last night. It covered our tracks. We are safe. For now." He stared at her, at the new, hard strength in her face. This was not the woman he had pulled from the snow. "You said things," she said, her voice quiet. "In your fever." His eyes shuddered. "Fever dreams mean nothing." "You said his name," she pressed, her voice gentle but firm. "The partner who betrayed you, the man who set the fire and killed your brother." Reed went very still. "What did I say?" "You said his name was Mason." He did not deny it. He just watched her. "My husband," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The man who bought me, his name is Mason Kearns." Reed's good hand clenched. He stared at her, his mind slowly catching up to the horror of her words. He had known she fled a man named Mason, but in the chaos, in the desire, he had not. "Kearns," he repeated. The name was venom. "Mason, Kearns, he owned a ranch near Denver. He came to us, talked of a partnership, expanding." "He traffics in debt," Annabelle said, her voice cold. "He partners with men, ruins them, and takes what is left. He did it to your ranch. He tried to do it to my father. When my father was ruined, he took me instead." Reed looked away. He looked at the burned-out wall of the shack, the man he had been hunting for 5 years. The man who had destroyed his life and taken his brother was the same man who had brutalized this woman, the woman who had slept in his bed, the woman who had just saved his life. The revenge he had lived on, that cold fire, suddenly burned white-hot. But it was no longer just for him. It was for her. He met her gaze. "He thinks I am dead." "I know." "He does not know you are with me." "No, he just knows I ran. He sent those men to bring me back as his property." A plan began to form in Reed's eyes, a cold, deadly calculation. Annabelle saw it. She put her hand on his good arm. "Listen to me, Reed. You have lived for this, but it is not just your fight anymore." He looked at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. "You gave me back my name," she said, her voice fierce. "You made me Annabelle again. Now, I will help you take back your life." He covered her hand with his. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was steady. They were not 2 victims anymore. They were a reckoning. They rode for 2 days, avoiding towns, traveling hard. Reed's strength returned with every mile, his weakness burned away by the singular, shared purpose. He taught her how to reload the rifle while riding, how to track, how to see the things he saw. She, in turn, told him everything she knew about Kearns's ranch, the one she had fled. She knew the layout, the number of men, the guard rotations she had frantically memorized during her 1 day of marriage. They did not go to the ranch near Denver. Kearns, she explained, had a larger, more fortified operation in the southern plains, a massive spread where he ran his empire. That is where he would be. They stopped on a high ridge overlooking the Cimarron River. Below them, nestled in a valley, was the ranch. It was not a home. It was a fortress, a large main house, a dozen outbuildings, and a 20-foot stockade wall. "He is in there," Annabelle said, her voice flat. "He has at least 15 men." 15, Reed said, lowering his spyglass. "They will be watching for bounty men. They will be watching for you, a lone woman. They are not watching for a ghost." He looked at her. I am going in. Reed, no. They will kill you before you get 10 feet. Not if I walk in. He thinks I am dead. The sight of me will stop them. It will buy me time. It will buy me him. It is suicide. It is a trap, he corrected. But I am not the only one in it. He wants you, Annabelle. You are his weakness. I am my own. He laid out the plan. It was desperate. He would ride in the main gate as bait, demand to see Kearns. The shock of his arrival would cause chaos. In that chaos, Annabelle would be his overwatch. From here? She asked, gesturing to the ridge, which was half a mile away. No, he said. He pointed to the massive hay barn inside the compound, just opposite the main house. You will be in there, in the loft, with the rifle. How? You know the layout. You said there is a blind spot on the east wall, near the creek. You will go in tonight, while I make a distraction at the south gate. You will hide. You will wait. When I walk in tomorrow at noon, you will be ready. And what happens when the shooting starts? You find Kearns, he said, his eyes cold. If I go down, you find him. You do what I taught you. Aim for the center. Do not miss. That night, it worked. A small fire in a dry patch of brush near the south fence drew half the guards. In the confusion, Annabelle slipped over the east wall like a shadow, her body aching, her heart pounding. She found the barn. It smelled of hay and horses, a scent that now turned her stomach. She climbed the ladder to the loft and buried herself in the hay, the rifle cold against her chest. She waited. It was the longest night of her life. At dawn, she watched the ranch come alive. She saw him, Mason Kearns. He walked out of the main house, shouting at a stable hand. He was just as she remembered, barrel-chested, expensive coat, a cigar in his mouth. He looked rich, powerful, and alive. She gripped the rifle, her hatred a cold, solid thing. At noon, she heard the hoofbeats. Reed Carver rode through the main gate. He did not ride fast. He walked the buckskin, his hands loose on the reins, his rifle in its scabbard. He wore his coat, his shoulder bandaged beneath. His scarred face was uncovered, turned toward the sun. Men yelled, drawing their guns. Hold it right there. That is far enough. Reed stopped the horse in the middle of the yard, 20 yards from the main house porch. I am here to see Mason Kearns, he called out, his voice carrying in the still air. Mr. Kearns ain't seeing nobody. Get out. He will see me, Reed said. The door of the house opened. Mason Kearns stepped out, his face annoyed. What in the hell is all this? He stopped. He stared at the man on the horse. The cigar fell from his mouth. His face went white. It cannot be, Kearns whispered. Hello, Mason, Reed said, his voice quiet, but it carried across the yard like a death rattle. It has been a long time. Carver, Kearns breathed. Reed Carver, you are dead. I saw you. The fire. You saw what you wanted to see, Reed said. He swung his leg over the saddle, dismounting slowly. He did not reach for his gun. You left me to burn. You left Elias to burn. You were our partner. It was business. Kearns stammered, his eyes darting to his men, who were frozen, watching the ghost in their yard. Just business. You call murder business? You call stealing a man's life business? Reed took a step toward the porch. Kill him! Kearns shrieked, finally finding his voice. He is just a man! Shoot him! The yard exploded. From the hayloft, Annabelle saw it all. She saw the men turn their guns on Reed. She fired. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder. The man closest to Reed, the one raising his pistol, spun and fell. Reed dove, pulling his own pistol, rolling behind a water trough as bullets chewed the wood. The yard was chaos. Men were shouting, firing at the loft, firing at the trough. She is in the barn, one man yelled. It is the wife! She is in the barn! Ben, the bounty man from Silverton, who had apparently returned to his master, led 3 men in a charge toward the barn. "Reed!" Annabelle screamed. Reed saw them. He rose from cover, firing, taking 1 man down, but Ben and the others were already inside the barn, on the main floor below her. Kearns was still on the porch, his own pistol out, firing at the trough. "Burn it! Burn the barn down!" Annabelle heard them below. "We know you are up there. Mrs. Kearns, come on down." She looked down through the slats. Ben was at the bottom of the ladder, his rifle aimed up. She fired down, the bullet splintered the rung near his head, and he scrambled back. Reed used the distraction. He broke cover, running for the porch. He was a storm, a thing of pure rage. He shot the last guard on the steps and launched himself at Kearns. He hit him hard, sending both men crashing through the front door of the house. In the barn, Ben yelled, "She is trapped! Light the hay!" Annabelle smelled the smoke. They were setting the barn on fire, the same way they had tried to kill Reed. She scrambled to the large loft door, the one used for hauling hay. It overlooked the yard. She unlatched it, pushed it open. It was a 15-foot drop to the hard-packed earth. The smoke was thickening. "Annabelle!" Reed staggered out of the house, his face bloody, but he was standing. Kearns was gone. "Reed, they are setting it on fire!" "Jump!" he yelled. "I will catch you!" She looked down. It was too far. Behind her, the hay ignited with a whoosh. Flames licked up the wall. Ben appeared at the top of the ladder, his face blackened. "It is over, bitch!" He raised his rifle. Annabelle screamed as he fired. The bullet struck the wood frame beside her head, sending splinters into her cheek. She stumbled back, falling out of the open loft door. She fell, twisting in the air. Reed was there. He caught her, breaking her fall, his body absorbing the impact. They went down in a heap, her on top of him. Ben stood in the flaming loft door, aiming his rifle down for the kill shot. A single shot echoed from the main house. Ben's chest exploded. He looked down, surprised, then pitched forward, falling from the loft to land with a sickening thud in the yard. Reed pushed Annabelle off him, his eyes on the house. Mason Kearns stood in the shattered doorway, a smoking rifle in his hand. He looked confused. She was my property. She was never yours," Reed growled, getting to his feet, pulling Annabelle with him. I saved you," Kearns said to Annabelle, gesturing at Ben's body. "He was going to shoot you. I saved you. You are my wife. You will come back." "I am not your wife," Annabelle said, her voice shaking but full of ice. "I am his." She stood beside Reed, and for the first time, she did not stand behind him. She stood with him. Kearns's face twisted. He saw it. He saw he had lost. He saw the ghost he had failed to kill, and the property he had failed to break, standing together. "If I cannot have you," he hissed, his eyes mad, "no one will." He raised the rifle, aiming it straight at Annabelle. Reed did not hesitate. He fired his pistol. Once, twice, a third time. Mason Kearns did not stagger. He did not look surprised. He just collapsed, his body folding in on itself. His reign over, the rifle clattering on the porch. Silence fell. The only sound was the roar of the barn, now fully engulfed in flames. The remaining ranch hands stood with their hands in the air, their fight gone. Reed looked at the body of the man he had hunted for 5 years, the man who had taken his brother, his home, his face. He looked at the flames of the burning barn. He felt nothing. The cold fire that had kept him breathing was out. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. "Reed," Annabelle whispered, touching his arm. He turned to her. He looked at her face, smudged with soot, a bleeding cut on her cheek from the splinter. He saw her, alive, breathing, her eyes fixed on him. He reached for her, He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, his body starting to shake. The 5 years of hate, of cold, of loneliness crashed down on him. The revenge was done, and it had not kept him warm. He broke. He held on to her and wept. Not for his brother, not for his past, but for the first time in his life. For the terrifying, overwhelming relief of having something to live for. He chose her. He chose the future, not the past. Later that night, the barn was a field of glowing embers. The ranch hands were gone, scattered to the wind. Reed and Annabelle walked through the smoldering ruins of the main house. They found her room, the one she had occupied for a single day. Her trunk was still there. Inside, beneath the fine dresses she had left behind, was the wedding veil. They took it outside. They walked to the ranch fire pit, where the embers of the barn still glowed. Reed held the veil. Annabelle took one side. He took the other. They did not speak. They dropped it onto the embers. The delicate silk blackened, curled, and then ignited, rising in a column of bright, fleeting sparks. They watched it disappear into the night sky, holding each other, as the wind carried the ashes away. The spring came not as a gentle thaw, but as a violent cracking. The snow melted in a rush, turning the canyons into torrents and the valleys into mud. The world, frozen white and silent for months, was suddenly roaring with the sound of new, unbound water. They did not stay at the Kearns Ranch. It was a graveyard, poisoned by the past. The day after the fire, Reed found the safe in the burned-out office. It was full of gold certificates and cash, blood money from a dozen ruined partnerships. Including his brother's, he took only what was owed, 1/10 of the stack, enough to buy a new life. He left the rest to be discovered by whatever law Mason Kearns had bought. They rode north, back toward the high country, leaving the smoke and the ghosts behind. They rode for 5 days, speaking little, healing. The wound in his shoulder was clean, mended by her care. The cut on her leg was a puckered pink line, a scar to match his. They found the ridge near the end of the first week of spring. It overlooked the Animas River, high enough to be safe from the spring floods, with a clear, fast-moving creek running along its eastern edge. It was sheltered by tall pines and aspen, and the view to the south was a vast, open expanse of mountains and sky. "Here," Annabelle said, pulling her mule to a stop. Reed stopped beside her. He looked at the valley, at the clear water. "It is good land." They made camp, and they did not leave. They started building. It was hard, grueling work. They lived in a canvas tent bought on their one tense trip back to Silverton. The town had buzzed with the news of the shootout at the Kearns Ranch. The story had already twisted. The scarred devil, Reed Carver, presumed dead for 5 years, had returned with the runaway bride to exact a terrible revenge. The remaining bounty men had fled, telling tales of a ghost and a woman who shot like a man. When Reed and Annabelle walked into the Silverton General Store, the room fell silent. Men who had whispered about them now looked at them with a mixture of fear and awe. Annabelle, no longer the terrified girl in a wedding dress, walked with her head high. Reed, his scarred face impossible to read, simply laid a gold coin on the counter. They bought tools, axes, a saw, nails, window glass. They bought seeds, corn, beans, squash. They bought flour, salt, and 2 new rifles. The store owner, a man named Peters, counted the change meticulously, his eyes never quite meeting Reed's. "It is good to see Mason Kearns's accounts settled," Peters said quietly, pushing the sacks toward them. It was the closest the town would come to a welcome. The townsfolk began to accept them, not with friendship, but with the practical respect the wilderness demands. They were survivors. They were not trouble, unless trouble came looking for them. By midsummer, traders heading up the pass would stop at their ridge to water their horses at the creek. They would trade tobacco for fresh jerky, or news for a cup of coffee. The whispers about the scarred devil and the runaway bride faded, replaced by the simple, grudging acknowledgement of the carvers on the ridge. The house rose log by log. It was not the tiny, dark cabin of their winter prison. It was a solid, two-room home with a real porch and two wide windows to let in the light. Reed, it turned out, knew how to build. He had built his first ranch with his brother, Elias, and his hands, scarred and whole, remembered the work. He swung the axe, his bad shoulder healing with the strain, the muscles growing strong again. He notched the logs with a precision that mesmerized her. Annabelle worked beside him. She learned to mix mud and straw for the chinking, her hands becoming calloused and strong. She learned to use a draw knife, peeling the bark from the pine logs until they were smooth and pale. They worked from sunup to sundown, falling onto their shared bedroll exhausted, their bodies aching, but the sleep was deep and dreamless. When the house was finished, they built the furniture. Reed found a clear, straight-grained piece of oak and began to carve. He worked on it every evening by the fire, his long knife, the one he used to hunt, now being used to shape the curve of a rocker. Annabelle took to the land. She planted the garden in the rich soil near the creek. She hoed the rows, her hands in the dirt, feeling a connection to the earth she had never known. She was not the property of a land baron. She was a steward of her own small patch. She sewed quilts, her stitches, once clumsy, now becoming fine and even. The colors were bright, patterns of suns and stars, a defiant answer to the gray winter they had endured. The quiet moments were what bound them. The brush of his hand against hers as they passed in the doorway. The shared cup of coffee on the porch at dawn. Watching the sun burn the mist off the river. In the evenings, she taught him to read better. His education had been rough, functional. He could read a bill of sale and his own name, but little else. She brought out the small book of poems she had salvaged from her trunk at the Kearns Ranch. "This word," she would say, her finger on the page. "It is promise," he would sound out, his voice rough with the effort. "Good." He would look at her, his expression serious in the firelight. "I am not a learned man, Annabelle." "You are a good man," she would reply, "and that is harder." Their nights were a different kind of lesson. The passion that had been born in desperation and fear had settled into a deep, knowing intimacy. In the darkness, there were no scars, no ghosts. There were only their bodies, a geography they had come to know better than the mountains outside. His touch was sure, his hunger matched by her own, and their moans were lost to the sound of the wind in the pines. One afternoon, sorting through the last of the crates from Silverton, Annabelle found a folded leather pouch she did not recognize. Inside was an official-looking document from the land registrar's office in Durango. She unfolded it. It was a deed. It was for their land, the 160 acres on the ridge, filed and paid for. She read the name listed as the owner, Annabelle Wade. Not Annabelle Carver, not Mrs. Reed Carver. Her name, the name she had been born with, the name she thought she had lost forever. She found him by the creek, sharpening his axe. He looked up, wary at her silence. She held out the paper. Annabelle Wade? He stopped his work, wiping his hands on his trousers. He would not meet her eyes. "A woman should have her own name, her own land." "You registered it in my name," she said, her voice thick. "I had the gold," he said, gruff, as if it were an apology. She understood. He had done it on that first trip to town. He had done it in case the past, in case Kearns, in case his own vengeance had cost him his life. He had planned to leave her with something that no one, not even he, could take away. He had not sought to possess her, as Mason had. He had sought to free her, completely. She did not cry. She folded the deed and put it in her pocket. She stepped forward, took his face in her hands, both her hands, on both sides of his face, the smooth and the scarred, and kissed him, "Thank you, read." But the ghosts were still there. They lived in the daylight. He never took his shirt off when the sun was up. He would bathe in the creek at dusk, or wash at the basin inside, his back to her. The scars that marked his body were a map of his pain, and he was not ready for her to read them in the harshness of the day. One hot afternoon in late summer, the air was still and close. They had worked all morning, and they were both covered in sweat and dust. "Come," she said. "The creek is cool." They walked down the path to the shaded pool they had claimed as their own. She unbuttoned her shirt, removed it, and waded into the water in her chemise. The cold was a sharp, welcome shock. He stood on the bank, watching her. He dipped his hat in the water, pouring it over his head, but he made no move to undress. "Read," she said gently. "It is hot. Come in." "I am fine." She waded back to him. She stood on the bank, the water dripping from her, her clothes clinging. She looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the way he guarded himself. "Last winter," she said, her voice low, "I showed you my scars. The ones he left, you did not turn away." He looked at her, his eyes dark with old wounds. "It is just me," she whispered. "Let me see you, all of you." He did not move for a long time. Then, his hands trembling slightly, he unbuttoned his shirt. He pulled it from his shoulders, letting it fall to the ground. The daylight was merciless. The left side of his body was a tapestry of healed violence. The burn scars, old and white, spread from his shoulder down his ribs, pulling the skin tight. There was the long, puckered line of a knife wound on his forearm, and the raw, newer scar on his shoulder where the bounty man's bullet had grazed him. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stepped forward, so close she could feel the heat of his skin. She raised her hand and, very gently, laid her fingers on the twisted flesh of his shoulder. She did not pity him. She accepted him. She touched each mark like a vow. Her fingers traced the edge of the burn. "This one?" she whispered. "The fire," he said, his voice a rasp. She touched the long white line on his arm. "This one?" "A man in a cantina in El Paso, a long time ago." Her hand moved to the newest scar, the one he had taken for her in Silverton. She pressed her palm flat against it. "And this one?" He looked down at her hand, then met her gaze. His eyes were raw, vulnerable, more naked than his skin. "This one," he said, his voice thick, "was for you." She leaned in and kissed the scar, a soft press of her lips against his skin. He shuddered, his good hand coming up to tangle in her wet hair, and he pulled her to him. A few weeks later, the morning sickness began. At first, she thought it was the heat, but after a week of waking to a churning stomach, of a new, bone-deep weariness, she knew. She had been married for a single, violent day, but she was Reed Carver's woman, and she was carrying his child. She was terrified. They were two broken people, their lives built on the ashes of violence and revenge. What right did they have to create something new, something innocent? She waited until the sun had set. They were on the porch, him in the rocking chair he had built, her sitting on the steps, leaning against his knee. The stars were brilliant, scattered like salt across the black sky. "Reed," she said, her voice quiet. I am with child." The rocking stopped. The night went utterly silent. She could hear nothing but the distant rush of the river and the pounding of her own heart. He said nothing. He slid from the chair, kneeling on the porch steps in front of her. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face in the starlight. He was looking for fear, for regret. Is it?" he stammered. This man of few words, this man of action, unable to form the question. "I am sure," she said. He reached out, his hand, the scarred one, hovering, shaking. He laid it on her belly, his touch so gentle she barely felt it. His palm was calloused, but it was warm. She saw the fear in his eyes, a fear that mirrored her own. "I do not know how," he whispered. "I do not know how to be a father. I am what I am." "I am afraid, too," she confessed, her tears finally coming, hot and fast. "Do we even deserve this? After everything? After Jeb? After Kearns?" He looked up at the stars, his hand still on her. He thought of the fire, of the 5 cold years of hate, of the emptiness he felt when Kearns was finally dead. And he thought of her, pulling him from the snow, stitching his leg, standing beside him in the street. "I do not know if we deserve it," he said, his voice rough. "But maybe we earned it." He leaned in and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of salt and coffee and the promise of a future. They sat and watched the river run down the mountain, silver in the moonlight. The air was turning crisp, the first hint of autumn in the wind. Annabelle was sitting in the rocking chair, a thick quilt over her lap, her body showing the slight, new curve of her pregnancy. Reed stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his presence a solid, warm weight. She leaned her head back against him. "Reed." "I am here. Do you still think revenge kept you breathing?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the vast, wild hills, dark under the stars. He looked at the home they had built with their own hands. He bent down, resting his scarred cheek against her hair. "No," he replied, his voice low. "You did." She reached up, covering his hand with her own. He laughed, a low, rough sound she had rarely heard, and she joined him. The wind carried their laughter across the wild hills. Thank you for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed the journey with Annabelle and Reed. Where in the world are you listening from? We would love to know. Please comment and let us find out. Remember to subscribe to From Wild West, and we would be grateful if you shared your thoughts on the story with us, in English